Thanks, Noshir. Good morning. When McKinsey puts a position paper, it would be very brave on anybody's part to disagree with anything unless you have a very strong basis. And I must confess, I don't have a strong basis on which I can voice my disagreement. But nevertheless, I would like to state some broad observations on the study, the conclusions, and the basis for the study, as well as our own experiences in Satyam, and in what way perhaps those experiences present an alternate point of view sometimes. Data-based inferences can be very funny. It depends on the process that you use to collect the data and the analysis method that is used to drive towards a conclusion, and the bias one would have towards a set of conclusions as opposed to the alternatives that are available. The sampling also needs to be looked at, and perhaps the complexity related to the basis on which the data is gathered and the space that is used predominantly for data collection needs to be analyzed as well. I would just make two broad points about the conclusions and the observations, and then I would share some thoughts on Satyam. First, I was just wondering when I went through the data, both in the presentation as well as the paper that McKinsey put out, whether the diversity of situations that we deal with in the business environment and the complexities involved in many things that we do, I was just wondering whether there was an oversimplification of those aspects when data was considered and the conclusions drawn thereof. For instance, there was an observation of customer expectations changing at a rapid pace. That is true. We would not contradict that. But we would also need to look at how much of that change is brought about by us. Every one of us, our endeavor is to continue to move up the value chain, try to create greater value for the customers, and invest in the relationships and continue to service the customers in a holistic way and create incremental value. To that extent, often enough we find that we give ideas for the customers to set the bar higher than the customers wanting to expect more from us. So while our success clearly encourages customers to expect more from us, I would argue that our own aspiration, our own vision sets the expectations even higher. And most of us, when we aspire, we don't always aspire with a well thought out implementation plan that supports the aspiration. Aspiration always leads reality. To that extent, we need to put appropriate mechanisms in place to support that aspiration appropriately enough. And I would argue that there's always going to be a lag between the expectation setting and the reality. I think we just need to take that into consideration. Second, from an IT services perspective particularly, the type of engagements that we are getting into are diverse and very complex, and it keeps changing at a very, very rapid pace. Technology changes, the business landscape is changing, customer expectations are changing, the mergers and acquisitions that are taking place in the market are redefining the business context that we deal with in the context of every customer. So the complexity involved in managing customer expectations is increasing multifold in our experience, and I would argue that that's the case with most of us. In that environment, operating in a well-defined, predictable, expected environment under the definition of operational excellence might be very hard to achieve and achieve it with regularity. I think that's something that we need to also take into account. Operational excellence being a critical focus area for an organization cannot be debated, and we have obviously internalized that as a significant focus area for Satyam. We have done a number of things to drive towards greater operational efficiencies and operational excellence. Have we arrived? Of course not. There is a significant opportunity for us to do better. We have consciously moved many of the engagements towards fixed price models, wherein we take greater accountability to manage the cost as well as the quality of delivery. We have also engaged increasingly in models where risk and reward sharing between customers and us are becoming more a reality today. And I believe that that gives both positives and perhaps risks. The positives are clearly there is an upside in us investing in the process and investing for greater proliferation of better practices across the industry segments that we operate within. The downside obviously is the risk that we need to contend with, but then there's always greater reward in proportion to the risk that you're willing to take. So if you look at our recruitment processes, we have clearly established practices as well as processes that deal with the realities of resourcing today in India. There is obviously a greater strain on the supply side, particularly at the experience level. So we can't draw boundaries around geographies, around a specific area of competence and say we will deliver BPO services from Chennai or Hyderabad, or we will deliver enterprise applications from Chennai. Those kind of decisions, I don't think we have a luxury of making any longer. We have to be nimble. We have to be receptive to the changes that are taking place in the market. So when you are reacting to the market, there is always going to be a lag between what you would like to do ideally versus what you need to do tactically in order to deal with the business reality that we have to contend with. But having said all that, operational excellence is a very important area for us in Satyam, and I'm sure it is the case with the industry. I would just like to end it with a small example to highlight how difficult and challenging it is sometimes to take a fairly uninvolved and rational perspective. We were dealing with a customer. We had a fixed price project. Project went into some rough weather. The only situation that we had under our control was to deploy additional resources that Vivek and Noshir talked about. We threw bodies and competencies at it. And the customer, of course, said, I'm not willing to pay for it. It's your mistake. You screwed up. You do whatever you need to do. We engaged in a debate at an operational level to see whether this is a scope creep or it is truly a mistake. Ultimately, the chief executive of this organization called me and said, if you want to maintain this relationship, you fix it and no questions asked. Then we can talk about whatever else that your challenges are. And, as the situation called for, we made that investment. We said, okay, there are 5-10 people that are going to be flying to New York to be there at the workplace next Monday. They were there for the next 3 weeks trying to fix the problem. It costed us a few $100,000 to fix the project. But the rate of growth in the relationship has been 500% in the next 1 year. And the profitability went up by 150% in the next year. So if we take a tactical, discrete decisions and say sometimes it may not be in the best interest from operational excellence perspective to make investments of the kind, I just wonder aloud whether we are compromising the strategic importance and criticality. At the end of the day, we are clearly concerned about our growth and profitability, but most important, customers, in our opinion, would like us to own their problems as if it is our own. If we are not able to relate to the customer's pain area, if we are not able to step up to the plate and solve the most critical issue for the customer, independent of issues related to profitability and operational excellence, I'm not so sure whether the partnership will be as strong as it can be. However, there are always going to be instances where we have to make some hard decisions as to whether the relationships are worth maintaining in the longer term or not. Those decisions need to be made as part of the operational excellence initiatives, but I would argue that it's not as black and white as supported by the metrics. We just need to be good businessmen, as I said, at the end of the day, and the decisions that we make need to make better business sense. Thank you.